In this video, I'm going to show some more updates on the amp. So we're going to start with putting in the pots, all the different potentiometers. Each amp has 6 potentiometers, and I'm just going to cut a bunch of wires to length and then strip them down, put in a little J-hook, that way they're mechanically secured, and then I'll solder them to all the pots. The brand of potentiometers that I'm using are CTS, and those were ordered through ValveStorm. I think I showed the ValveStorm website on a previous video. CTS is a pretty good brand. I've only had one bad batch where the wiper wasn't making good contact with one of the lugs. But in general, I think CTS is a more reliable brand than like Alpha or some of the other potentiometer brands. The best ones are probably still Bourns. That's Bourns. They make all sorts of stuff, but for guitar amps and specifically like 2-watt potentiometers that are like mil spec, you could go with I think it's PEC. Those are super expensive though. They're sometimes $15, $20 per pot. For the switches of this amp, I'm just using some switches I had lying around. These won't be the final switches. So this first amp is really more just get everything working. And then once I know everything's good to go, I'll finish up the other 4 with the actual switches and the right wire length. Each amp has 3 switches, so there's 2 bright switches and then 1 tightness. And all of those are 3-way switches. So here's the input jack, that cliff jack. And these are nice because if you wire them up for it, they can do grounding when there's nothing plugged into it. That's something that you'd want to do on an input, but you'd never want to do that on an output jack. If you were to do this diagonal wire on an output jack, basically when no speaker cable's plugged in, you're shorting your output transformer, which is something you don't want to do. So I'm going to put in a hole on the front panel just for the input jack, even though these aren't going to be where the final holes are going to go. So I've got this in addition to like a pilot standby and power switch, but these are all just temporary. They'll eventually get covered up on this first amp head when I do the big 5U front panel. So I use shielded wire from the input to the PCB, and the ground is only connected at the jack. So there's only the hot lead going to the PCB. I'm not bringing that ground to the PCB. While I put in some of the switches and start soldering those, you'll notice the blue and white twisted pairs. Those are my AC heaters for all the tubes. They start kind of off to the right there as the black and orange pairs for the power tubes that are slightly thicker gauge, and then I go to the white and blue wires. In the future, I'd like to switch over to DC heaters. That way I can just get rid of those entirely and have some nice thick traces on the board that do the DC for the filaments. But for right now, they're not too bad. They're not as pretty as I would like, though. You'll also notice I totally forgot to leave a through hole or a pad for the negative feedback. So that purple wire that goes from that resistor up to the output jack, that is my negative feedback. Just putting some temporary knobs on these pots so I can control them. And then this is actually a thermal image of me testing the filaments. So with those AC heaters, we can see all 4 of our 12AX7s are lit up. The phase inverter does run a little bit more hot than the other gain stages. And then back there we can see the 2 power tubes. And this isn't at full wall voltage or with the plates, the high voltage turned on. So there's a soldering iron for reference, you know, well above 150. And with that in the screen, it makes everything else look cold. But then as I go back to the amp, all I'm doing now is just checking if there's anything on the board that's getting too hot too quickly. So in this case, there are a couple resistors that'll heat up, but they stay around 30, 40 degrees C, which is okay. All of those resistors are, I think they're 2 watt rated. They might even be higher. They might be 3. I didn't use my camera, but I did check that I was getting negative voltage, so the bug bias circuit is working. I was able to adjust the voltage range as well. I couldn't get that negative voltage quite as high as I'd like, so I need to do some tweaks on that input divider so I can get into a better range for the power tubes. And then again, I'm going to show you what those tubes look like. I think the wall voltage is a bit higher this time, and I might even have the high voltage, the standby, turned on. So the power amp tubes, you'll see they get pretty hot. They're up at 100 degrees. But I think part of that is due because I have a lower voltage on that negative bias. So that's it for this video. I know I said we'd make some noise by the end of February. We're getting close. Everything's slowly coming to life. Next time I start working on this, I'll hopefully be able to show you guys what it's sounding like, and we'll probably end up troubleshooting a couple different areas too. Thanks for watching.